Welcome back, party people. Here we are, big idea number 3. Lecturers, obsolete. Learning designers, way of the future. When I hear the verb to lecture, which I hear still quite often in the higher education context, it causes a very visceral, internal reaction. Because doesn't it just invoke images of so many of our own educational experiences in higher education where someone was talking at us, not with us? And again, I know we've talked already about class sizes, higher education as a business model, and all these kinds of systemic changes that are going to happen in the process of the education revolution. But today I want to hone in again on the role of the educator, because last time we were talking about the fact that AI is not going to replace you. But if you consider yourself a lecturer and the actions and behaviors that you embody as an educator are one of transmission, then I'm sorry to tell you, but no, it's not going to last. The honeymoon is over. And we are looking at learning designers. I teach a course in a school of continuing studies here in Toronto on learning design, the certificate of learning design, and focusing on assessment, because as we all know, that's what I geek out on. But it's incredible how many people are taking this course and how many are enrolled in the certificate, because they understand that learning design, this idea of creating an experience where people are interacting with content, with each other, with you as a subject matter expert, because you're still allowed to be a subject matter expert. I'm not going to take it away from you. So today, we're going to talk about the identity crisis around being a subject matter expert that is no longer a lecturer. We're going to talk about why it's so important to be more of that facilitator, what everyone likes to call the guide on the side, co-learner in these educational experiences. And I also want to talk about the fact that something that a good friend of mine reminded me of recently, which is that education is creative. Sometimes because my German mother wins out in my mind and I'm very efficient and structured, I lose sight of the fact that I'm actually a creative, just like everybody, just like so many others. Who write or who paint or who make music. We compose learning designs, and that is an inherently creative act. And there is something very creative and chaotic. I'm thinking of like a Jackson Pollock painting right now, you know? Like there's structure in the chaos, where you're looking at structuring those interactions with content, with peers, and with yourself as a subject matter expert. So, number 1, identity crisis. It sucks. Yeah, I understand. I went to teachers college I got my certificate in a 2-year master's program in like 2004. So like 21 years ago. Nowhere did it talk about teaching and learning online. Nowhere did it talk about, this idea of learner-centered. I mean, there was an understanding that students have to participate in the learning process, but not to the level that we require it today in order to build the skills to differentiate us from the machines. So we have not been taught as educators, many of us who went through schooling in the last 20 years, how to adapt and see ourselves as more than our subject matter. Elementary school teachers are afforded a bit more in this domain because they are often Renaissance educators, and they are often charged with, although not necessarily it's not necessarily nice or good for them that they've been charged with this responsibility, but they teach a lot of the human skills already because they're teaching such young learners. They teach a variety of topics and subject matters because they are often with students on a more regular basis, as opposed to those rotary systems you get in high school. And then of course the very targeted subject matter expertise that you explore at the university setting. Regardless of what level of education you're in, though, there is a level of teaching at people that we need to do less of and more embracing the chaos. So I did teach at the primary junior level in the Toronto District School Board for a number of years, but I teach in the alternative school system. People used to always ask me, like, what makes the school alternative? And ultimately I was a learning designer and not a lecturer. So work was hard for me. I needed to consistently adapt to what was happening in the room and create those channels for interaction with content, with peers, with myself as subject matter expert, with themselves in reflective practices. I was charged with designing that adaptively over time, something that I developed skills for and it was to a certain degree predisposed for with my characteristics. But we need to be looking at what teacher education programs or professional development programs look like now. And it needs to start with empathizing with the fact that this is hard. No matter what level of education you teach at, this is a difficult truth. Because what is our job? Who are we? Is a big question and something that a lot of us have very entrenched ideas about. So I empathize with that, number one, of course. Number two is, why is it so important to change, right? Well, we want to be focusing more on skills-based learning than knowledge-based transmission. We want to be figuring out a way to integrate technologies like AI in a meaningful fashion, which requires a level of humility on our part as an educator. We also know that we need to be competing with a lot of educational products that are on offer in the world, right? Like there's a lot of asynchronous, I don't need to name a bunch of brands, but there's a lot of asynchronous courses available everywhere. What makes learning with you special, different? What is our role as an educator that is different from the robot who will not replace us as learning designers? Because we can coach, facilitate, support interactions with material in a way that is very different than a bot. So it's important to be making this shift towards learning design because it will keep us versatile and valuable as we move forward in our careers as educators. It also just happens to create learning experiences that can be more powerful, memorable, have deep impacts on our students. When we look at more scenario-based, role play, high levels of feedback, formative assessment structures, integration of reflective practices, authentic assessments, like these are the environments where learning thrives versus that passive consumption of materials. And there are a lot of educational products on offer, a lot of noise in the teaching and learning space that I understand why people think that they're going to be replaced, but they are not teaching. And what is happening is not learning. There's a level of memorization. There's a level of short-term application of whatever's been, how do I change a tire? Let's watch a YouTube video. But when we're talking about deep learning, we're talking about creating experiences and learning over time, interacting with content, people, and those that we trust to have answers to our questions and adapt on the fly. And those are rich. Those are meaningful. Those are mammalian. Those are oral storytelling around a fire millennia ago. And they will not be something that we can avoid reverting back to. And we have the luxury as educators of looking at that kind of meaningful learning design in an age where we have so many tools at our disposal. And that's where the creativity piece comes in. So we no longer have like a blue and a red and a yellow and I don't know, those primary colors. I'm obviously not an artist in my creative endeavors, but we don't just have the primary colors on our palette anymore. We have a lot of tools at our disposal, and we are innately, educators are predisposed with certain levels of skills where we are able to combine ideas and information in our subject matter domain very effectively and creatively. And what we need to do is start to reposition ourselves and consider our identity in line with that creative practice, and look at tools like AI as another color on our palette that we can include in our experience design in order to improve our outcomes, whatever those may be, the knowledge and skills outcomes that we want to see in our learners. So if we can embrace the fact that we are innately creative as an educational profession, embrace the truth that this is valuable and important in the world that we're living in today, then we can approach our identity crisis and this aversion to change that is normal and natural to have as a human species. We can approach it with more compassion, more understanding, and more enthusiasm. Take some of it from me. And we can approach it as a cohort with more enthusiasm as we start to look at who we are and what we're designing as this beautiful canvas. And next week, again, I'm going to say assessment is the linchpin here, focusing on how we design assessments and thinking creatively about how we design our assessments with that learning designer hat, as opposed to the lecturer hat that often produced Scantron multiple choice summative exams. Then we are going to be well positioned as we move forward with the education revolution. Stay tuned next week, more on those authentic assessment measures and how AI can help us in this endeavor. The Education Revolution podcast is produced in-house by community members, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Sangera. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and head over to my website to opt in for my newsletter for more ways to connect with some of these big ideas.